believe was teased. We're gonna do Dune this week.
Dune. Now, I don't know about your experience with Dune, but I first read the book in probably middle school. Had a huge impact on me. Recently reread it in anticipation of the upcoming film at that time, probably in 2020. And it's always been one of my favorite books, especially in the sci-fi genre.
Yeah, my dad was obsessed with it. He definitely, when I guess like watching David Lynch's Dune was like my first like big budget sci-fi film I saw after Star Wars. And my dad like hyped it up so much because he just loved Dune. I remember watching it, and it was still cool and crazy. It's just like, where's the lightsabers? uh,
Right.
but
Arguably less accessible than Star Wars, maybe.
certainly for like a 9-year-old or whatever. But my dad loved it, and I grew up with Dune. And as I grew older, I grew to appreciate Frank Herbert's masterpiece. Uh, and the board game, I've actually got the Dune board game, which is a lot of fun.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to overstate kind of the significance of Dune and its impact on science fiction. Um, the analogy I kind of come to in my head is like Lord of the Rings essentially set the paradigm for fantasy things that came after it, like elves, dwarves, hobbits, kind of D&D style stuff. I think Dune did a much the same for science fiction. Like without Dune, you wouldn't have Star Wars.
Sure.
I would argue, certainly. I mean, you got multiple planets, political intrigue, some action sequences. I think its footprint is in almost every sci-fi thing that came after it to some degree, just like Lord of the Rings affect the fantasy genre forever after.
Yeah, and on a very related note, like if Jodorowsky's Dune, which is a wonderful documentary about the unmade Alejandro Jodorowsky's vision for Dune, alludes to his kind of like creative input and ideas and visions for the series are like literally borrowed and just like all of sci-fi that follows after. Anyways,
This podcast is about the 2021 Dune. Since it just came out, it's fresh. You can still view it on HBO Max now, as far as I know.
you can. I watched it this morning, actually.
There you go, a little last minute cramming.
Yep, pretty much.
This one's directed by I believe his name is pronounced Villeneuve. Villeneuve. I'm not totally sure. I'm not a French expert.
I mean, I'm not either. I'm not so good with the other languages.
He's a pretty badass French-Canadian filmmaker who also did like Blade Runner 2049 and Arrival
Wonderful.
and some other good films. And he's critically acclaimed and commercially successful. And, when I heard he was doing this new Dune film, I thought he was the perfect choice, basically, because, I mean, did you see Blade Runner 2049?
I did. I absolutely loved it.
I liked it too. I mean, as far as a Blade Runner sequel, it did a pretty damn good job, I thought.
Well, he's got the like sci-fi polish that I think really it's what Dune needed. It needed that like expertise and aesthetic that is just like so evident in his other all of his other works, but certainly the sci-fi ones.
Yes, and he gives very great visuals in his works. Both films kind of give you a sense of scale that is very hard to achieve, I feel like. They're mostly through CGI, but he does it extremely well. And yeah, I was anticipating this one for quite a while. I guess I kind of want to talk about some of the background of the adaptations of Dune, because it's been There have been many attempts to adapt it into a film, and it's just a very involved, complex work of literature that is proven to be difficult to adapt because there's just so much going on. And one thing that Villeneuve did well, I think, is kind of making it a concise statement where he doesn't explain everything, but if you're paying close enough attention, you kind of get the gist of what's going on.
And there's just so much to explain. Like the just to call it just like another sci-fi work is a huge injustice, and like just the degree of complexities they have with like the political factions and their workings, and one of my favorite elements of the book, like resource conservation and like how important it is on Arrakis, and like just water cycling. Like it's all stuff that I think as humanity continues to do its thing on this planet will become more and more important. So he's like visionary in that regard, but also it's a degree of interwovenness that like actually depicts the complexities of man. And it's not something that like you fast forward 10,000 years into the future, or 8,000 years into the future. Uh, you know, there's a lot to unpack there, and he does it extremely well without having to hold your hand through all of it.
Exactly. I mean, there is a lot to unpack there. And I mean, frankly, I feel like the new film kind of just cuts a lot of that out. And that's kind of why it works as like a blockbuster action film. I mean, there are elements of those themes, but largely they don't focus on those because they're trying to make it accessible and, popular. Not a philosophy film about ecology, which is certainly what the book Dune is partially about. But so ever since Dune was first published in 1965, there was interest in adapting it into a film. Of course, this proved to be much easier said than done because again, it's just massive in scope. You have to build an entire world. It's not like you're starting from a framework that the audience can understand. You have to again build an entire world. The first attempt to make Dune into a film, and we're just going to cover this real quickly because it is interesting, I think, began in 1974 when Alejandro Jodorowsky took on the project. Now, absolutely, I think you should watch Jodorowsky's Dune because it's badass. He had an all-star team of concept artists who included Mobius, who's a French comic book creator, and he's highly influential in the world of sci-fi. He also worked with René Laloux, who created Fantastic Planet, so this guy's got a resume on him.
Yep.
Also hired on was H.R. Giger, who is a Swiss artist who makes a lot of dark and creepy work involving these biomechanical, like cyborg alien things, and a lot of dicks.
Yeah, bioindustrial, lots of shiny shafts and long, elongated body parts in general.
Yes. Just give him a Google. I wouldn't call it safe for work necessarily.
Or you
again,
can
lots of dicks.
Literally just watch Alien, and that'll catch you right up to speed.
So obviously he had some great concept art on board. He wanted Pink Floyd and this other progressive rock band called Magma to do the soundtrack for the film, which is a great idea, frankly. At that time, Pink Floyd had already done another soundtrack for a film called Zabriskie Point. They released the sessions. It's called the Complete Zabriskie Point Sessions, and it's one of my favorite Pink Floyd albums. It's super badass. Fun fact about that, Jodorowsky met up with the members of Pink Floyd in a McDonald's to pitch them the idea. And they were basically like, just didn't give a shit. They weren't that enthusiastic. They're working on Dark Side of the Moon. So they're working on their own visionary masterpiece at this time. And they just didn't seem that interested. And eventually Jodorowsky was basically screaming at them, I offer you the most important picture in the history of humanity. We will change the world. And you're just eating Big Macs. So he got a little upset at them. And then eventually that convinced them. They took on the project.
Well, I mean, it's a convincing argument. Before we get too far, Alejandro Jodorowsky of Holy Mountain fame.
Yes. Valid. That's important. Holy Mountain, El Topo. And I mean, he's a far out filmmaker in his own right,
Everything
who
he
eventually we're going to cover.
everything he did is pretty fucking far out.
His movies are just weird acid trips that are art films, full length art films, basically. For the cast that he had in mind, Salvador Dali is the Emperor. Mick Jagger was going to be in it. Legendary filmmaker Orson Welles is Baron Harkonnen. David Carradine was going to be Duke Leto Atreides. So he had a massive, massive epic vision for this project. And ultimately, it was going to be 10 to 14 hours long. And no studio wanted to accept the project because they all thought he was insane.
Yeah. That's a literal whole day viewing event. Like you show up at 8 a.m. and you were there watching that film in theaters the whole
And
day.
if you've seen any of his films, they're just full of like psychedelic sequences. They're not even, they could be hard to watch for 2 hours, much less 14.
And they were paying Dali like $1 million a day or something like that when the studio like
Yes, that's
the rug out from under
absurd.
him. So
Like,
yeah,
I would love to see this film just because.
things got pretty off the rails by the numbers guys perspective, and yeah, they pulled the plug, but they retained kind of his what would you call it?
Basically, that whole team went on to make the film Alien with Ridley Scott. Which another interesting thing about that is how that kind of came to be was in the 80s, Ridley Scott was actually signed on to direct Dune. They like took Jodorowsky off the project, put Ridley Scott on it. And then I think like his brother died or something while they were planning it and he just had to pull out. And eventually they gave it to David Lynch, who's another far out filmmaker. So the Dune adaptations have a far out pedigree of you're talking about the most far out directors all have like touched this in some way or another.
Yeah, pretty much. And rightly so. It's pretty far out fucking material.
Yes. So David Lynch was the next visionary director signed on board to bring Dune to life. His version actually did get made. It stars Kyle MacLachlan from Twin Peaks. He's Agent Dale Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
Love him. Sean Young, she's I think the android in Blade Runner. Brad Dourif, Patrick Stewart, Sting. And his film features music from Toto and Brian Eno, which is, quite different than Pink Floyd and Magma.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe a small step down from that, but what can you do? So it was a massive critical and commercial failure. and at the time, it had a $40 million budget, which was like the biggest budget of any movie out. And it was just a massive flop. Everyone hated it, including David Lynch himself.
I have a soft spot in my heart for that version, though. Again, just childhood memories, and
I like it too.
it's not all bad. I like Kyle MacLachlan.
No, it's ridiculous.
Paul
It's a
Atreides.
little over the top. Oh yeah, exactly. And I like the Baron, and a lot of things in that are cool. David Lynch hated it, however. He basically said he had no artistic control over it, had no say in the final cut, and eventually he even took his name entirely off it. So now in some of the more recent cuts, David Lynch's name is not in the credits. It's not on the film. Instead, it's the pseudonym Alan Smithy, which I did a little research into this. And Alan Smithy has long been considered the formal official pseudonym in the film industry from directors who want to disown their projects. So that's David Lynch's feelings about it. I think it's worth checking out. And if you're a Dune fan, how have you not seen this movie? Surely you probably have.
It's worth watching. I mean, I will say that 2021's Dune got some things very right that Lynch's, or what'd you say the pseudonym was? The
Alan Smithy.
Alan Smithy's Dune did not quite hit home on. but
It was a mess. It was a
I still
mess.
like it.
It's hard to figure it out if you haven't read the book, which I mean that might be you might be able to say that about the latest adaptation as well, but David Lynch one's it's messy. It's messy. So, cut to 2016. That's when it was announced that there'd be a new Dune adaptation with Denis Villeneuve taking the helm. The new one stars Timothy Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, Josh Brolin, Stellan Skarsgård, who was fucking probably the best part of the new Dune movie. He plays Baron Harkonnen, who I thought he did a great job.
Yeah, as the Toad Man.
Zendaya, who's a weird person who only has one name, I guess.
Yeah.
Jason Momoa, and Javier Bardem, who's pretty badass. And I did notice when I was looking at the cast and watching the film that they just pulled all these actors and actresses straight from the Marvel universe and the DC comics. So it's a clear attempt to kind of make it appealing for a mass audience, get that Marvel audience, which I don't know. I think you could argue that was kind of a mistake.
Sure. And while we're talking about the cast, I'm just going to get this out there and get it over with. Rip the band-aid off. I don't think Zendaya brought much to the table in terms of acting in this. She just kind of makes that face that she makes in every movie, and she emotionally or emotionlessly delivers the lines, and it's just kind of whatever. And I don't know.
She didn't have that many lines though, so I don't.
Well, she has the opening monologue, so.
A lot of the scenes with her in it were just visions where like she's just standing there looking mysterious. Who I hated in this movie was Jason Momoa. I thought there were some casting mistakes. I kind of get it. He's there to pull in that Marvel audience, bring some chicks to it, the theaters, but that just kind of took me out of it. It was just they threw him in there just for that mass appeal to that Marvel audience or whatever.
What about Josh Brolin?
Josh Brolin's great. I mean, I understand he plays what is it, Thanos in the Marvel Avengers films.
Correct.
He's a great actor. He just is, and I don't think he took anything away from it.
He also plays Cable though, which is weird because that's also in Marvel. But
oh, I haven't seen that.
I'm pretty sure he's Cable. He's one of the from the future X-Men. I'm pretty sure it's Cable. Anyways.
I mean, yeah. So, yeah, I had a few problems with the casting choices. I see what they were trying to do. Kind of like boil it down to that largest common denominator of like, they're trying to make money off of it. That's, it's not a purely artistic endeavor. It's also a commercial one, which, I'm glad it did make money, by the way. And I'm glad it did because that means we will get Dune Part 2 and hopefully a Part 3 dealing with the second book, Dune Messiah. Honestly, going into the Dune film, I had no idea that it was in 2 parts, so I felt a little bit cheated. It's called Dune. It's not called Dune Part 1, I don't think.
I mean, why wouldn't you make it a 2-parter? Really?
Why wouldn't you make it an HBO series? Because I honestly think that would be the best format for it, like a Game of Thrones type thing.
Well, they already tried the sci-fi series for Children of Dune.
That shit's low budget, though.
You're right, it is. But, I mean, they made the fucking Hobbit into a trilogy. Like, of course you're going to cut Dune into 2.
Milk it.
Yeah.
Milk it. I did, it's interesting because as I was researching this episode, I did find out they are making an HBO series called Dune the Sisterhood, which is going to focus on the lives of the Bene Gesserits.
That's kind of cool. That's actually...
It has potential. It has a lot of potential.
That's super cool.
It should be awesome. I mean, I kind of wish they just did that with the the main Dune material, because there's 6 books written by Frank Herbert and they just get weirder and weirder and weirder.
Yeah.
And more awesome in a way. And I think there's a lot there. They could have had season after season of this and made tons of money. But I mean, they're still going to make a lot of money off the film.
Yeah, and everybody's chasing that Game of Thrones fucking dragon, man. And like, I just don't think any productions got anybody that's going to be that hooked for, 8 seasons, even with the last 2 being, a big bag of diminishing returns.
I mean, but the source material is what made, and the big budget of the show, and probably the writers on the show. But I mean, it's the source material is just so undeniably good.
Agreed.
And I feel like it's the same with Dune. I mean, I feel like the Game of Thrones, the Song of Fire and Ice books by George R. R. Martin are epic on the same level of Frank Herbert's work. And I think that might be like our generation's Frank Herbert to some degree
Hmm.
because he's absolutely prolific. Um, yes. So for the soundtrack of this movie, they got Hans Zimmer, who's one of the most famous film composers of all time.
Hmm.
The soundtrack has a lot of kind of desert singing, like throughout it, which gets a little bit annoying to be totally honest.
Yeah.
And also a lot of bagpipes for the Atreides theme, which I actually thought that was pretty dope.
All I'm saying is like they evolved more or less independently from all other human contact on that shit desert planet, and they just like somehow developed the exact same, like desert.
Culture is the
Yeah,
Middle East.
yeah. But
And it's
at least like with
yeah.
the music, show me something cool and different with the music.
Well, it's if you go back to the original book, so much of it is influenced by Islam. They're constantly throwing words in there from Arabic language, and they're talking about
That's
jihad,
fair. That's fair.
crusades, all of which is notably absent in the film. They just didn't even want to go there
Sure.
for the sake of like being politically correct. Which I don't think the actual terms they were using are that important as the concepts. And also, to be fair, Frank Herbert kind of bastardized those concepts
Sure.
anyway. I mean, he assigned a radically new meaning to some of those terms.
Uh, I was going to say I'm gonna eat my words a little bit. There's a scene with the Atreides like troops coming off of a big vessel, and they've got a bagpipe player. And while
Yes.
the instrument certainly is distinguishably bagpipes, it's not you know they didn't like lean into, I guess, kind of like the stereotypical note progressions you would expect when you're trying to portray Scottish music. It was like a tweak on the instrument's traditional application, which I thought was cool. That's fucking cool.
That was super cool. And like the bagpipes are apparently the House Atreides theme, which I thought was kind of regal and
Dude, it's
it was a
awesome.
nice
It's
touch.
awesome.
So, you want to get into like the actual story and the plot cuz there's a lot to dig into here, especially if we're going to try to explain some of this stuff.
Okay, yeah.
I don't even know where to start, man.
So yeah, it's a big question. Um, I guess first and foremost, there's this stuff called spice, and like more or less, the movie's monologue opens explaining this. Um, Spice can enhance physical and mental capabilities. It can prolong life. It like literally is wonder cocaine. Like just like the perfect substance to lust after. And it is also because of a weird. The book takes place in 10,000 AD or like 1050 or 10500. I don't know. Sometime in the two or 100th century. There we go. That's how you would say that. Um, and while man has like spread out amongst the stars and the galaxy, and mankind is ruled like in an empire style with an emperor. Uh, some of their tech is, I guess, it the tech tree followed human potential as opposed to like computer potential because they had like an AI near apocalypse or whatever. So faster than light travel is made possible by people who are just like just totally engulfed in spice that allows their brains to like see just slightly into the future so they can navigate the galaxy at faster than light speeds. So spice is important. It's like the most important substance in the universe.
Yes, and it kind of seems to drive the whole economy of the universe. It's like one of their main kind of exports. They mine this stuff constantly. Again, like Andrew said, it's psychoactive. It allows people to see lightly into the future, gives you some kind of like precognition abilities, you might say.
Uh,
And if you are taken entirely off of spice, I believe you die.
mm-hmm.
And it's highly addictive. And on the planet of Arrakis, which is the only place where spice is found and harvested, it's just in the air. Like the second you get there, you're just breathing this stuff in constantly. So there's no way to live on that planet and not essentially get addicted to it over time and take on some of its abilities.
It causes physical mutations in super heavy users. So the common mutation that pretty much affects anybody once they have developed their spice addiction is their eyes turn this very specific shade of blue. Um, and like so, pretty much everybody that lives on the planet's eyes eventually go blue if you're there long enough. Heavier use causes them to get even like darker in that coloration and more pronounced. And I mean, again, there's like recreational aspects to the use of it. Like it's not just like a means of industry or whatever. Like it makes you feel good.
Yep. And so again, it's only found on this planet of Arrakis, also called known as Dune. Um, Essentially, it's a desert planet that has giant sandworms on it, which, again, Star Wars does a nod to this. They have a sandworm on one of their planets in the movies that was later redone with horrible CGI.
Horrible CGI.
But also, there's these indigenous people living on the planet called Fremen. All of them have blue eyes. They're kind of like still living in these tribes and caves. Dune, again, it's a sand desert planet, so conservation of water is a major theme of the book and the film. If you don't have a still suit, is what they call it, which is basically it's almost like a spacesuit that recycles your body's moisture, you will die like right away. Is the impression I get.
Yeah.
So it's just a really harsh environment. No one is able to really live there without a whole lot of money, except for the Fremen. So essentially, you have two houses. There's the House Harkonnen, who are the evil people in the story.
Mm-hmm.
They have been in control of spice production on Dune for, I believe, 80 years or so. Now, then you have our protagonist, House Atreides, which is basically our main protagonist is called Paul Atreides, and then you have his father, Duke Leto, and his mother, Jessica.
His concubine.
His concubine, exactly.
Yes.
And it's Paul's mother, Jessica. We'll get back to them in a second. But at the beginning of the film, the premise is the Emperor of the Galaxy or whatever has called upon House Atreides to move all their shit to Dune, take over spice production. The Harkonnens are going to leave. So you can kind of think of this as like two houses in Game of Thrones. Like they're just mortal enemies. House Atreides, all of them kind of know it's a trap. Like this doesn't make sense. Why would the Harkonnens leave Dune? They're just making tons of money there. They're the Amazon of their day,
Now the house,
It's like
House Atreides is known for being like exceptional warriors. And maybe that could be the guise of it or whatever, but like it ultimately doesn't make much sense that they're getting brought to this planet to take over after
exactly.
nearly a century of the Harkonnens having control of it.
They kind of suspect it's a trap, but like in their own dream logic of this world, like they just keep walking into the trap. I mean, it's their destiny or whatever, which is kind of a theme of the whole story, destiny and all of that, and fulfill your destiny. So at the beginning, a little more background. There's also this like group of witches, essentially called the Bene Gesserits, who they're major political players in this world. And I mean, how would you describe them?
I mean, they're like witches, man. they kind of like a Jedi has control of the Force. They have a similar control, psychically.
The
It,
voice.
yes, they have the voice that they can use to, which is literally like a Jedi mind trick. Like these are not the droids you're looking for.
Yeah, George Lucas just stole that right out of Dune for
Yeah,
sure.
pretty much plucked it right out. But they, beyond being this kind of like, you know, coven of witches who have kind of like a religious role, or kind of in a ceremonial way at least, uh, they also shape political direction by advising various households and ultimately running like a genetic, you know, program to try and bring about the Messiah, essentially.
Yeah, they're on some weird shit over there, those Benny Gesserits.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like a shadow government that has a lot of influence with the emperor and all these other houses. And yeah, again, they have a breeding program where they're trying to bring about a messiah that has been prophesized for a long time. Like they know they're almost at the end of that breeding program. I guess Jessica, who is Paul Atreides' mother, she was supposed to have a daughter, and her daughter was supposed to have the Messiah. Well, Jessica disobeyed the orders. She did have a kid with the Duke Leto, but her child, she made him a boy. I guess she can choose the gender because they just have such control over their own bodies. She disobeyed the Bene Gesserits and the Reverend Mother, who was the head of their weird cult, and had a son instead. And they never have sons. It's all women in this group. And the prophecy was that one day there will be a boy, Bene Gesserit, who will be the Messiah. He'll be the one. He'll be like Neo from the Matrix.
Or
And he
Jesus.
will have godlike powers.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much traditional Messiah thing.
So she had a son, Paul, who was our main character. At the beginning of the movie, and I believe it's the Reverend Mother comes and she brings this box.
Oh yeah,
And this is like one of the coolest scenes in the film. She's like, "Put your hand in the box," and basically it's a test. She puts a needle against his neck, and she says, this box is a test. It's gonna be extremely painful, more painful than anything you can imagine. If you pull your hand out, I'm gonna stab you in the neck with this needle, and you're gonna die.
high stakes.
High stakes. And I mean, I almost, Frank Herbert obviously was a scholar of other cultures and stuff. I have to wonder if he knew about like those bullet ant
Oh
gloves that
yeah,
they wear in Africa as like kind of a coming of age ceremony.
yeah. You inflict numerous bites from literally the most painful stinging insect on the planet, pretty much, all on your hand, and then you trip fucking nuts, allegedly.
I believe it. I mean, that's a lot of poison going in your body. um, and then there's a whole part where she's talking about how fear is the mind killer, which is like a famous quote from this. But, it's kind of this idea that, you should have the people in this Bene Gesserit order have such power of their mind over their physical body, they should be able to withstand any pain. Then after it's revealed that actually the Reverend Mother pushed Paul further than any Bene Gesserit's ever been pushed in that challenge. She turned the dial all the way up to 11 on him,
Yep.
and
You see this
he
stuff?
passed the test, which, is one more kind of thing confirming that he might be the Kwisatz Haderach.
I'm glad you said that because I was gonna fuck it up.
Kwisatz Haderach,
Yep.
who, aka the One, the person who's so powerful, he's supposed to be able to bend space and time. So he's God, basically. So he passes that test, Everyone's kind of mad at Jessica for having this boy, but they're kind of rolling with it, He might be the one or whatever.
Well, they reveal, as they plan to depart for Arrakis, the Bene Gesserit have been involved, trying like on Arrakis, trying to kind of shape a path for them there.
Yes, and essentially they've done their witch stuff and kind of spread this rumor around the Fremen indigenous people of Arrakis, and everyone knows about this prophecy. Everyone's waiting for him to come. I do want to say at the beginning of the movie, you get a cool scene with Gurney Halleck, who is played by Josh Brolin. He's kind of like he's just a badass in the movie. He's like a if not a command, I'm not exactly sure what he is, but he's like a general in their army, and he's actually the one who's training Paul how to fight. Which Paul is a good fighter, partially because he has these Bene Gesserit powers where he can like sense stuff, his spidey sense. So they have a cool scene where he's training them, and they're using these like weird hologram shields,
Which are cool. It's one of the coolest parts of the whole.
that is one of the coolest parts. And maybe this is a controversial opinion, but I thought it was cooler in David Lynch's.
I was gonna say it's the coolest part of David Lynch's. Is that the same scene?
The weird boxy blue boxes.
Yep.
But anyway, so, Paul's had a high degree of training. He's been being trained by the best. Another general for...
There's numerous scenes where he's like being trained by like a little, like robot educator or whatever, just like
Yep.
playing educational videos.
Exactly. So he's got the best education you could possibly get.
Yeah. So he's basically, I mean, he is literally the child of the elite in Dune World.
So, the Atreides, House Atreides, they follow the orders of the Emperor. They pack up, they go to Arrakis, Dune planet. Once they get there, all the locals are already there, and they're chanting, Lisan al-Gaib, which apparently means Messiah. They've been waiting for Paul. They all know the legend. Thufir Hawat, who was a Mentat, which we'll just briefly go into this. Mentat, it's almost like Hand of the King in Game of Thrones, but
They're living computers.
yeah, they're living computers. Their eyes roll back in the head, and they can like do computations and stuff. And their eyes are blue because they're all hopped up on the spice, so they can see the future. And they're kind of important to the story. Cool little... They're not central characters, but they are important. Thufir Hawat, who is the Mentat, who is on the House Atreides side, he informs Paul that all those people everyone here is still loyal to the Harkonnens. So don't really trust anybody. At this part, we are introduced to ornithopters, which are pretty cool. Which is basically like their flying vehicles they use to get around.
Yeah, they look like dragonflies.
Yeah, I don't remember how they were described in the book, but they're so cool in the film. They're just giant dragonflies, which makes perfect sense considering many of our actual aircraft we used are modeled off the engineering of Mother Nature,
Certainly wing shape. And like...
Yeah, it turns out natural selection has a way of being pretty efficient when it comes to flying and getting around.
Life finds a way.
Yeah, so now they're all on Arrakis. We're kind of being introduced to this world. We find out, it's a horrible environment where it's like impossible to live without your still suit, again, which recycles your body's water.
Including your pee.
Yep, including your pee, your sweat, everything,
Yeah.
spit. So it's just a super harsh environment. And they have all these kind of rituals on Arrakis, which are about the rich people. They kind of show off their water fat, as they call it. But, it's they'll spit on the ground when they greet each other as kind of showing off how much water they have. This is how rich I am. Which is interesting because I was just reading yesterday about how the reason we have grass planted in our yards is originally because nobles were showing off that they were so rich they didn't need to plant crops in their fields. Which it's something, I don't know if that's true or not, but it's same idea,
Yeah.
Rich people always like to show off how rich they are. Which, that's kind of shocking to Paul. And immediately he kind of wants to set about changing this because he thinks it's disrespectful to waste the water.
It is. Truly.
And I want to say they're all having a dinner together and they all like pour some of their glasses of water out on the ground or something. And they just have all these rituals about water. But we're introduced to Jason Momoa as Duncan Idaho, and Duncan Idaho is a central character to the Dune novels. I mean,
He's just like basically the mega Chad. He's just, a badass fighter pilot, great strategist, just like all
he's the right
around,
hand man.
all around, just good guy you want to have on your side.
He's solid. He's solid.
Solid.
Some other cool stuff. One of the Fremen give Jessica a Chris knife, which is a sandworm tooth, which they do not explain in the film, but there's a lot going on with these sandworms that is revealed in the later books.
I think they do.
But I want to.
They do say Chris Knight's made from a sandworm
Oh, do they?
in the movie. They do for sure.
Yeah, so it's the tooth, and I want to say like later on, maybe not in this film, definitely not in this film, but I feel like we learn that the sandworms actually produce the spice, and that's where it comes from. And if you killed the sandworms, you essentially in the spice, and it gets really nutty. Eventually, the main character Leto 2, I want to say he becomes a giant sandworm later on.
Yeah, Leto too. So that's Paul's child.
Paul's child, who he has with Zendaya.
Yeah, Zendaya's character. Who none of this will be featured in the movie we are talking about right now, just to be clear.
No, it's just some cool lore stuff.
Yeah.
None of that's in. Most of this is just the movies. It focuses on the action scenes, obviously,
Yeah.
and just visual spectacle. I mean, some parts of this film you might say are a little bit boring, but you're never going to say it's not visually impressive.
And Leto too, being Paul's child, just becomes like totally engulfed in fucking spice and turns into an actual sandworm slash human thing slash living god.
It gets pretty far out.
It's pretty wild. Major spoilers, by the way. Sorry. As always.
We're introduced to Liet Kynes, who is a planetologist and environmentalist, and they give the Atreides clan their still suits, which is the Fremen technology. She takes them up in an ornithopter. And when I say them, I'm talking about Paul and Duke Leto, to see how the spice is harvested. They're flying around. They find the harvester. It's harvesting the spice. Then they see what they call a worm sign,
Also,
which I guess is...
harvesters just like totally remind me of Jawa's fucking tank thing they drive around in Star Wars. Not to keep jumping back to Star Wars, but
Well, Star Wars ripped a lot of this off.
yeah,
Let's face
that's
it.
what I'm trying to say, but not like directly say that,
I think we can say that.
Okay.
Star Wars is like, it's a composite of a lot of other ideas that came before it, mixed with a heavy dose of hero's journey.
Yeah.
But a lot of it's stolen right from Dune, I would say. Basically, the harvester, which is just a giant like spaceship, it like starts breaking down. And Duke Leto's talking about Duke Leto, the king of the Atreides clan. He's talking about, man, they just left us a pile of shit. All this equipment's fucked up. It's old. When the Harkonnens left, they took all the good equipment. And also, he has essentially a quota of spice production that he has to meet, which is going to be impossible to meet with the equipment that has been left of them. So he's been set up to fail, essentially. He pretty much figures this out immediately. So the harvester malfunctions. A sandworm is coming. Giant sandworm. They're like, half a mile long or whatever.
Yeah.
We're talking huge. Can swallow a spaceship in one bite. Duke Leto, just being a badass hero, he says, I'll risk my own life. I'm going to save this crew of 21 people, which they ultimately do. We see the sandworm come up out of the ground, swallow the harvester up, which is a super cool scene. Super cool visually.
Yeah. And again, like emphasis on just like the Atreides just being like very honorable, like they're what you'd want your nobility to be as a serf. That's who you want to be paying your tithes to. versus the Harkonnens, which are more like, I don't know, whatever the cruelest, most horrible real world leader example we can give. So Harkonnen's Donald Trump for some people's.
I want to say there's a little more nuance in the books, but especially in the film, when you got so much ground to cover, they're kind of one dimensional, you know? Atreides are the good guys, and you got the Harkonnens, which are just evil. They look evil. You can, the second you see them, you're like, those are the bad guys.
So yeah, in the books, the Baron in the movie is very, as he said, has like the evil physiognomy. It looks bad. They just look evil. The Baron at one point was very handsome, and he in like the expanded universe, he'd like raped a Bene Gesserit, and she like did that to him. She made him hideous.
Made them all obese and covered with boils in the book.
Correct, with some like chemical curse, effectively.
And it's kind of at this point in the movie where Paul gets his first real heavy dose of spice. We're talking about the stuff that's on Arrakis that makes you trip balls and see the future. So at this point, you know, he's right next to the harvester where it's producing all the spice. So the spice is just heavy in the air. He starts seeing these visions of the future where we see Zendaya. And I want to say they're like making out or something stupid, but
Yeah.
he also sees a vision of himself surrounded by Fremen in a cave. And when he's making out with Zendaya, she ends up stabbing him with a knife. Yeah, so they get out of there. They get back to the base.
And it's like it's clear that like shit is set against them at this point. Like they've been set up to fail.
They're fucked.
They're fucked. And then what I think is one of the more iconic scenes, again in this film and also the David Lynch one, is the assassination attempt on Paul.
Yes.
So like while Paul is meditating or I don't know doing his private shit alone in a room, actually he's learning. He's watching the same fucking projector education thing that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
But out of a little like water hole in the wall or whatever, out comes this little like pointy
Mosquito.
yeah, pointy looking needle drone or whatever.
It's a mosquito.
It is. I mean, basically, but it, you know, it's like a seeker.
They call it a hunter seeker.
God damn it, Star Wars literally took this as well. Anyways,
Damn it, George Lucas.
Yeah.
Do you not? I mean, he, with all of his prequels and sequels, I mean, we did learn he doesn't have any original ideas. I think that's established.
correct. But Paul's able to stop this little like homing dart robot as like a servant enters the room, and then it launches towards her because it detects her motion. He catches it with his bare hand and disables it. And they find, which I think is a pretty cool detail, there had been a Harkonnen assassin that they had just literally cemented up inside the wall. And he'd been laying there for weeks waiting for the
wow.
waiting for the opportunity,
I forgot about that. They don't even touch on that in the film.
which is like some crazy dedication, you know, from an assassin.
That is crazy dedication.
Yeah.
And then Paul essentially uses the Force. Not to keep bringing it back to Star Wars, but that's how he catches that fucking thing.
Yeah.
It's the Force. He has Force powers.
Yeah. Pretty much. But it's like all this, like I think helps paint just like how brutal and harsh the Harkonnens are. Like they're cruel, terrible rulers that like torture and maim, and they have like the technology of near gods and like all the wealth in the universe. Like it's highly implied that they have this one weird like multi-legged thing, and it has like hands for feet on its legs. It's like a spider, but it's like put together via lots of human parts.
They're doing some weird, like, kind of almost like Nazi experiment looking shit over there.
Exactly. And they have like the dark shiny leather, oily aesthetic as well.
Let's talk about that for a second because we haven't actually gone to their world at all, which I forget what their world is called off the top of my head, but the
It's
Harkonnen evil world, where everything is kind of has that H.R. Giger aesthetic. It's real creepy looking. They're clearly evil. Again, the Baron Harkonnen is played by what's his name, Stellan Skarsgård.
yep.
Great performance, kind of reminiscent almost of Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now.
Okay.
Like they don't, in my opinion. I mean, he also has a physical resemblance as a big fat bald guy, but they also don't show him very much, which kind of adds to the effect of his creepiness, you know.
It,
And yeah, he's all oily and kind of creepy looking. And then at one point, like the Reverend Mother, I think it's the Reverend Mother, some head of the Bene Gesserits comes to him. And she's basically saying, yeah, the Emperor is all in. We're all going to move against the House Atreides. But we need you to spare Jessica and Paul because we have a plan for them. They're part of our weird eugenics program.
it's Getty Prime.
Getty Prime. Also sounds exactly like a Star Wars planet, but
Yep.
Caladan, Alderaan. Anyway,
Yeah.
there's a lot of similarities there, a lot of points of reference. But so yeah, we find out that this plot against House Atreides involves the Bene Gesserits, House Harkonnens, and the Emperor of the whole galaxy. And then after she leaves,
They don't really explain the Emperor's justification for it well in this movie.
they don't even really talk about the Emperor that much.
No, other
He's
than
kind of, that's a whole side plot they just kind of cut out for sake of making it coherent.
there's I guess like we see like the Emperor's like swordsman.
The Sardaukar?
Yeah, that's it though. I mean that's like
Yeah, but I think the main point is like this plot against them is just huge. Like there's no way they can survive this shit. And then after she goes, you know, the Baron's mentat named Peter, who's a great character, he kind of says, "You promise you're not going to harm Jessica or the boy?" And the Baron's like, "No, we're going to leave them to the desert to die." So
the
they're not
desert
gonna
will sort it
smoke
out from here.
And then he like lifts up his whole body and he like levitates up and he has like this long dress so he almost looks worm like. It's a very cool scene in the film, the new film.
Yeah, you talked about how he like moves around with his anti-gravity device because he's just so fucking fat.
Did we mention that?
That's how. So that is how the Baron moves around, and that's present also in David Lynch's Dune. But yeah, it's just a big fat man that floats around, kind of like a Dr. Robotnik kind of thing, you know. But he's not even sitting in a craft. It's like his like suspenders or whatever.
Yeah, he
He's
has
got-
suspensor belts or something.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a little bit silly in David Lynch's Dune. Like, it's just over the top. In the new film, they just go for straight up creepy and intimidating.
Yeah, just like
the
weird,
guy is scary.
weird blob with this long tapered fucking robe to the ground that he's floating around with. Looks like a vampire, honestly. Kind of has that like classic upside down Coke bottle shape.
Yes, and he is a great villain. His performance is one of the best performances in the whole film, I would argue. When many of the roles weren't cast that well, his role was cast perfectly.
So after Paul survives this attempt on his life, now things are starting to accelerate here. Dr. Yua,
Dr. Yue.
Yue, thank you, correct pronunciations. But the Baron has his wife and uses that leverage of, hey, I'm going to literally dismantle the person you love piece by piece and fucking wacky glue them back together in weird ways. And I jumping back to the spider thing, I kind of like the insinuation that that is Dr. Yue's wife.
Oh, interesting.
Because, like...
Maybe part of her, because wasn't it like 10 arms or something.
Yeah, it was like moving around, and the Bene Gesserit's like, get that thing out of here. And Peter's like, it doesn't understand English. It's fine. And she's like, she uses the voice, get out, and the thing just runs away. And she's like, it understood that just fine. Meaning
That was an interesting.
meaning it was
I
like
didn't quite get the point of that.
meaning that thing is like part human.
Right.
Um,
Interesting. I didn't even pick up on that.
so like possibly that's the fate of his wife. But anyways, because the Baron has Yue's wife, he disables the shields and allows the Harkonnen and Sardaukar troops to more or less just come and blow all their fucking aircraft up.
Yeah, so like after the attempt on Paul's life, they know there's a traitor among them, and it turns out to be Dr. Yue. He's almost a double agent, like Baron Harkonnen's got his wife. So really his only goal is to save her. He's going to sacrifice the House Atreides in the process. But so around this time, he actually manages to capture Duke Leto, Paul's dad, and the king, and he drugs him so he can't move. And then he basically tells him his plot. He's like, listen, I'm going to hand you over to Baron Harkonnen. Sorry, you got to be sacrificed. But I'm going to put this fake tooth in your mouth, and if you bite down on this, it will release poison gas. And he's like, I hate the Baron Harkonnen just as much as you do, maybe even more. So, yes, you're going to be sacrificed, but you can take him out with you. And essentially, I will see to it that Paul and Jessica escape. So, I mean, he's a very human character. And I mean, his intentions, he's kind of a piece of shit because he's, sacrificing a lot of other people to save his own wife. But at the same time, he's also going to take out the Baron Harkonnen, who's like the evilest villain in the galaxy or whatever. So
Or he's going to try at least.
Exactly. So he takes down the shields of Arrakis, which allows the Baron Harkonnen's troops and the Sardaukar, who are the Emperor's army of elite fighting force. They all come to Arrakis. They start taking fucking shit up, killing everybody. They capture Jessica and Paul, put them on an ornithopter with a few troops. Maybe not quite enough.
They're going to dump them in the desert somewhere.
Yep. Duncan Idaho manages to escape on an ornithopter, of course, because we're going to need him later.
Yeah, well, those tickets aren't going to sell themselves.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And so they take over the whole the base, the whole planet, essentially. Paul and Jessica, they're in the ornithopter. They're there with some Harkonnen troops. They essentially use the voice on them.
Yeah, Paul finally gets the voice down as they're talking about raping his mom.
Yes, and the voice is portrayed pretty interestingly in this film, where it's like, kill him! It's like an evil Gollum voice or something.
Like in your brain.
Yep, and it just sounds like satanic almost, like Exorcist voice. So anyway, they fuck those people up. The ornithopter crashes in the desert.
Yep.
They find a note from Dr. Yue, who he basically says, like, if you survive, like, use this desert survival kit and, do this. So he kind of left them a little care package, which essentially is like a tent that they can survive out in the desert with, and maybe some kind of beacon so that Duncan Idaho can find them. They aren't left with any still suits, though. So, like, even with this survival kit, their chances of survival are seemingly low. But eventually, Duncan Idaho shows up, played by Jason Momoa. He's got Liet Kynes, the planetologist, Liet Kynes. They rescue them, take them to an old ecological research base that's been abandoned. So they're kind of hinting that, like, Dune has a long history, because they do vaguely mention it in the film. Originally, when they got to Dune, they were going to plan on basically terraforming the whole planet, making it green again before they discovered the spice. And then they were like, nope, we need this to just continue being a desert so we can keep harvesting the spice. which, that's just a little side note more than anything else.
An interesting side note, though.
Yeah, and they just hint at it, kind of. Around this time, the Sardaukar track them down, this is the Emperor's elite fighting force. And there's a giant battle kind of at this ecological research base. It's this point when Duncan, Idaho, and some Freeman warriors, they start fighting. Duncan, Idaho, like kind of locks himself out. And you're like, oh, he probably died or whatever,
Yep.
presumably. Jessica, Paul, and Liet Kynes are able to escape. But then they still have to fight more. Eventually, Liet Kynes attracts a sandworm.
Like, she's going to ride it. We don't get to see it in this movie, but that's the thing. The worm riding. She uses a fucking thumper to, like, bring it in. She has her hooks ready. And then she gets just straight gutted from behind. Fucking Friday the 13th style.
Yep. I think that's a pretty good pickup line. Like, want to ride the worm, baby?
Yeah, want to ride the worm?
But anyway, a giant sandworm comes. It sucks up all the Sardaukar troops. Yeah, so at this point in the story, we're kind of getting near the end of the first movie. But Paul and Jessica eventually make it to these Fremen people who are living in a cave. They've all heard of Paul, essentially, because of the prophecy that the one's going to come. Here they meet up with Stilgar, played by Javier Bardem, who's a badass and is great in this film as well. And then they also meet up with Chani, who's the girl from Paul's Visions, played by Zendaya. There's kind of different factions among the Fremen. Like, some of them don't believe Paul's the one and, like, want to challenge him, essentially. Which leads him to a battle to the death with one of the dudes in the camp.
His name's Jameis.
And he's much bigger than Paul.
And throughout the movie, Paul, or at least the second half of the movie, after Paul's exposure to the spice, he's had some visions with this warrior in it. So basically, Jameis challenges Paul, like, in a fight to the death or whatever. And Paul, like, because of his fucking psychic savior powers or whatever, like, pretty handedly beats this guy. And he, like, hesitates, doesn't, like, want to kill him because he's never killed a man before. But the other guy, like, will not yield. It's like, the honor of the challenge is he has to fight to the death. So eventually he does, like, a cool little, like, fucking swim move, basically, and stabs the dude in the back.
Got him, man.
Kind of like...
Gotta kill him.
Like, finalizing and completing some of these, like, vision prophecies he's had.
Right. And he ends up spilling this dude's blood, which... forget how they put it in the book, but essentially, like, they spill his life water or whatever, which they don't get into this in the movie, but I think it's pretty neat. Whenever anyone dies, they, like, collect their body and then just, like, harvest all their moisture.
Yep. They literally wrap him up with, like a polymer, like, tarp thing or whatever, and tie it up tight to keep as much moisture in there as possible to bring his dead ass body back to wherever they're gonna fucking juice him.
Sure. Presumably they are going to juice him just like you juice a carrot.
Dude, fresh pressed Jameis, man.
So, I mean, yeah, and then that's kind of near the end of the movie. You got Paul essentially telling Jessica, look, I'm staying with the Fremen. I've seen all these visions. This is my destiny. And we just got to keep riding it out.
Yep.
That's pretty much where the first film ends. Now, Dune Part 2 is scheduled to be released in October 2023, so we got another year and a half wait from now. I did read that Denis Villeneuve wants to make a Part 3 covering Dune Messiah. Hope that happens. I would imagine they just made so much money off this first one that I can't imagine they won't make a
more
3 or more.
Dude, why not? There's no original ideas. You might as well juice the ones you haven't hit on recently for all they're worth.
Exactly. And, frankly, we never got a great Dune adaptation. I would say this, for all of its flaws, it still probably is the best one and most accurate in many ways. And just feels like, you know, I don't know that I'm going to call it a masterpiece, but it's fucking good. If you haven't seen it, I would check it out for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely worth the watch. I certainly, this is now the second time I've seen it, and it's a 1 year old movie because again I watched it this morning prior to us gathering here today, and it holds up. It's excellent. And I think the second half will be the more exciting one. I think like the best is yet to come.
Yeah, I mean, possibly. It just doesn't seem like. So the part one was 2.5 hours long. I don't see how they stretch the end of the book to be 2.5 hours long. I mean, I feel like the first part one covered like 3/4 of the book. Maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but we'll see. I think it might just kind of be like, those season finales of Game of Thrones where it's just like epic battles
Well,
for most of the movie.
yeah, I mean, he still has to like rise
He
up.
does some more cool
Yeah,
stuff.
he does some more cool stuff. It's coming.
He does some more cool
It's
stuff.
coming.
And Timothy Chalamet, is that his name?
Yeah,
What did you think of his performance?
I thought he was pretty good.
He was pretty good.
I've liked him in everything I've seen him in, which granted is just this and Don't Look Up in terms.
Oh, yeah, I've just seen him in this, and he does a good job at like being kind of meek and frail, I would say.
Mm.
Which is, I mean, they could have cast anyone into that role. I mean, they could have casted Jason Momoa as that role, and it would have been terrible. I thought Kyle MacLachlan in the David Lynch's Dune almost seemed a little too old and like manly to be a young Paul Atreides.
He looks pretty young in that movie.
I mean, he's young, but he's not. He looks physically capable more so than Timothy Chalamet.
It does look like a young boy.
He looks very much. I don't know. He's like 25 or something, I want to say. He looks like he's like 16.
Yeah. Hey.
Maybe I got that age wrong, but yeah. So he was a good protagonist for like a full character arc where he gets more powerful and kind of grows into his role of the prophetic one.
Yeah, the Messiah.
Muad'Dib, the mouse,
Muad'Dib.
the field mouse or whatever. Yeah, so I mean that about covers it, I think.
Some people call me the Spice Cowboy. Some people call me Muad'Dib.
Got any other tidbits you want to share?
No, man, I think we did it. We did the thing.
We knocked this one out. It only took 5 fucking months.
Yeah.
But now it's out there.
It is. So if you like this one, as always, like, share with a friend, subscribe, send us some fan mail, look for our Patreon.
There is no Patreon.
There will be a Patreon. More is coming. More
is coming.
better content, newer content. Not
Yeah, and if you got suggestions for what you want us to do, that's always great. We accept those happily. We're always trying to figure out which movie to do next. Not that there's any shortage of far out flicks out there.
No. All right, and personal promise we'll have another episode not 5 months from this one.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Signing off from Far Out Flicks. This is Braden.
This is Andrew.
And we'll see you next time, Flickers.